What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the Playmaker's Corner podcast. I'm your host for today, Simon Villanos, aka Coach V, and it is March 10th, 2026 when I am recording this. This is your 2026 week 4, I believe, Women's College Flag Football Rankings and Rankings and Recognition episode here. Talking about teams and players that really succeeded and excelled from March 2nd all the way to March 8th. At the time I'm recording this, it is March 10th, so there are games that have been played today and yesterday as well, but when it comes to our rankings, we will not include those. Same with our fantasy point leaders, Playmaker of the Week, all that type of stuff. But on this episode, we're going to recognize some great standout players and programs. And yeah, let's go ahead and get right into it. Alrighty, now let's go ahead and start with Playmaker of the Week. This obviously goes to the player that we felt like had the biggest impact for their program or team here. And, there are a lot of players to pick from. There's players all over the country who are putting up big numbers here. So we always keep that in mind. But we also keep in mind, the winning impact. How much did their contributions attributed to their win, and how big was the win, because we do have a lot of first year programs, and obviously getting that first win is always important here as well. Now, there's a lot of players to consider here, but we kind of narrowed it down here to these couple, starting with Cheyenne Brooks of Life versus Graceland, which was a blowout win versus a team that they really needed to beat, a team that we felt like in the preseason, was decent and was on a relatively same level as them. And Cheyenne Brooks, she had maybe a career game against them. At least I believe it was a career game. She played lights out, but 342 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, 34 rushing yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns in that win. I believe she had like maybe 5 or 6 incompletions and was near perfect in that one. And then on top of that, although it is listed as a scrimmage, Life did beat Florida Gateway. And, from things that we heard, it did not sound like there were sitting players, although it was, technically labeled as a scrimmage. But, a win over a team like that does matter. And so while that wasn't kept in full consideration, it was definitely something to keep in mind. Now, another quarterback actually, that we were looking at was Devin Cosgrove of Immaculata here. Got a big upset win here in their opening weekend, really the opening weekend for the Atlantic East Conference, as Immaculata goes ahead and beats Marymount by 2, I want to say 1 or 2 scores here. It was relatively close, but, she really stood out and got the first dub over the defending conference champions, and, this is the first time Immaculata has ever beat them in the time that they have existed. She had 148 yards and 2 passing touchdowns, attributed to the only scores in the game. And then also against Holy Family, a team they beat it pretty well here. 62 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, 22 rushing yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns in yet another win for them. And then our last finalist here was Emma Caniglia of Illinois Wesleyan in their first games. She played extremely well as they start out the season 2-0 versus DuPage, 202 yards and 3 touchdowns in that 2-score win. And then versus Illinois College during the Chicago Bears flag football event. That game was actually deemed the championship of that event, and she played really well, contributing to that win. As a passer, 93 yards, 1 touchdown to only 1 pick, but also have 38 rushing yards, a rushing touchdown. Caught 2 interceptions. Both of these interceptions were in the last couple minutes of the game. The last one was a pick 6 that actually sealed this game away here, as they would go ahead and win by I want to say a score, just barely here, and get away with one against Illinois College. And that's in large part to her contributions, not only on offense, but defense as well. So there you go. Now, a whole bunch of other quarterbacks that we absolutely had to look at as well. Katherine Hutchinson of Warner, I mean, she's been on an absolute tear. She hasn't thrown an interception, and I believe she has like 50 plus touchdowns already on the season. I think we are probably just looking for a stronger opponent for her to play well against, but that Playmaker of the Week is definitely coming for sure. Same with Bridget Kaiser, who's in a similar boat there, in my opinion. I think both of these players are due for one here soon, but we are eyeing a couple of matchups that we really want to see them turn up against. Regardless, both players in the MVP conversation, for sure, and we'll talk about that at a later time as the season goes on. A couple other quarterbacks I want to mention: Kayla Morgan of Aurora, Kira Green of Eastern, all had some big games this last week here. Talking about non-quarterbacks, Avalon Lux Offerman, really all the Warner receivers, Avalon, Anna Pat, Just Finley, they all had great games against Campbellsville, Florida Memorial, and Siena Heights, so that was expected. Kyle Massenberg of Eastern put in a lot of work as well. Krista Quinn really had a back-to-form type week. Claire Strong, the transfer from Rockford, going and playing for Aurora, kind of emerged as the wideout one for that team through these first couple games, so that was definitely somebody we considered too. But like I said, narrowed it down to our three candidates here, and we are going to have to go with Emma Caniglia of Illinois Wesleyan here. She played great, right? And I think for us, contributing on both sides of the football definitely mattered. That pick six to seal the game. Really, those two interceptions in those final minutes to go ahead and close that game. Absolutely massive. Love seeing a player get it done on both sides of the ball, and she's a freshman, right? And this is a young program. This is probably that Illinois college game specifically was the one that really convinced us because, for a young player in a young program to go ahead and clutch up such a close game against another team who's, a young program and whatnot, that obviously matters. And then obviously getting that win over DuPage as well, I believe their first win in program history. All of that contributes to our legacy and, the legacy of that program. And so that is your week 4 Playmaker of the Week. All right, now let's go ahead and talk about your fantasy point leaders here after week 4. And once again, like I said in the intro and in the Playmaker of the Week segment, there are so many players who showed out this week, as there was a lot of opening games for a lot of programs, as well as a lot of cross-conference play, and obviously you want to show out in those too. And so basically how this works, in case you are new to this, is that we take the stats out of every single player in the country, or at least the stats that are available to us or given to us, and we go ahead and put it in a fantasy point generator. Shout out simulatedfootball.com. We use the ESPN standard setting, and then we basically see how many points each player would have gotten based off of the stats they are able to put up in that game or week. Now, the only thing that's slightly different is that touchdowns are worth 6 points here all around, and so I went ahead and added those touchdowns specifically for quarterbacks. It's not a problem for anybody else. And so we do this so that we could highlight the best players who showed out and had great statistical performances from this last week here, and show which players, had the biggest impact for their team and program. So let's go ahead and hop right into it. Once again, I went ahead and separated quarterbacks and offensive skill players, or just skill players, when it came to total fantasy point leaders. So these are players who scored the most points this last week. Now, it's worth mentioning some players played more games than others. I will mention that, but ultimately these are the leaders, the players who scored the most points here from week 4. So let's go ahead and actually start with quarterbacks here. At number 10, we have the Playmaker of the Week, Emma Caniglia of Illinois Wesleyan versus DuPage, 202 yards, 3 touchdowns for 26.08 points versus Illinois College, 93 yards, 1 touchdown, did throw a pick though, 38 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown, 2 interceptions, and a pick 6, or one of those was a pick 6 for 27.52 points for a total of 53.6 points. Now, just ahead of her by 0.1 points at number 9, Ishihiro Wada of Kansas Wesleyan. Only played one game versus Midland, but starting out the season hot here, as this was a big game for them. 325 yards, 5 touchdowns, only 1 pick. Also had 55 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown for 53.7 points. Now, in 8th place is another quarterback who only played one game here, and that is Sawyer Rigdon of Barton College versus Mount Olive. 317 yards, 7 touchdowns, 1 pick, and 14 rushing yards for 54.08 points. At number 7 here is a player, and actually all the players moving on here at this quarterback position have played multiple games that were point leaders from last week. But we have Ava Wallace of Kaiser, who is looking to be pretty much a regular, week in, week out. But against St. Francis, 280 yards, 5 touchdowns, 1 interception, 4 rushing yards for 39.2 points. And then versus Campbellsville, 241 yards, 5 touchdowns, 1 pick, 13 rushing yards, also a reception for 39.72 points, for a grand total of 78.92 points here, which is absolutely massive because St. Francis and Campbellsville are 2 teams that were ranked. So I believe, if I am not mistaken, this might be the most points somebody has scored against 2 ranked teams. So there you go. Now at 6 is Ottawa's quarterback Anna Anderson versus Bethel, 234 yards, 5 touchdowns, 11 rushing yards for 41.56 points. And then versus Southwestern, 252 yards, another 5 touchdowns, 38 rushing yards for another 43.88 points for a grand total of 85.44. Now at 5 here to start our top 5 is Kira Green, the quarterback of Eastern, versus Chestnut Hill, 204 yards, 6 touchdowns, 1 pick for 42.16 points. And then versus Centenary, 392 yards, 6 touchdowns, 1 pick for 45.68 points. At 4 here, we have Kaylin Morgan of Aurora University versus Rockford. She had 275 yards, 4 passing touchdowns, 435 points flat. And then versus North Park, 324 yards, 5 touchdowns, 1 pick, 69 rushing yards, and a rushing touchdown to add on to that for a grand total of 53.86 points. And actually, an actual grand total of 88.86 points when you add those points from the 2 games. Now at 3 is Ava Valenti, excuse me if I'm saying that wrong, but the quarterback of Newman versus Penn State. Schuylkill had 160 yards, 4 touchdowns, did throw 2 picks, but had 97 rushing yards for 36.1 points. Versus Marywood had a much cleaner game, 325 yards, 7 passing touchdowns, 75 rushing yards for 62.5 points. Now at number 2, actually number 1 and number 2, both these quarterbacks played 3 games, that's worth mentioning. But at number 2, we have Bridget Kaiser of Milligan, who has been on one, versus Ferrum, 280 yards, 4 touchdowns, 2 picks, 23 rushing yards for 33.5 points. And then versus Emmanuel, 257 yards, 2 touchdowns for 22.28 points. A little bit of a quieter game there. But then kicked it back up against LaGrange, 344 yards, 6 touchdowns, 1 pick, and 6 rushing yards for 48.36 points, for a grand total of 104.14 points. And then at number 1, I think to nobody's surprise, is Catherine Hutchinson of Warner here. Through 3 games, went crazy ballistic here, versus Campbellsville, 389 yards, 10 touchdowns for 75.56 points, versus Florida Memorial, 354 yards, 9 passing touchdowns for 68.16 points. And then versus Siena Heights, 370 yards, 10 touchdowns for 74.8 points here. I think her as well as Ava Wallace do tie for the most, or maybe not tie, but they do have the most points versus ranked teams currently, I believe. And for Catherine Hutchinson, by the way, those 3 games added up to a grand total of 218.52 points, I believe. That is a new record in total points scored in a week. So there you go. Catherine Hutchinson heading up the quarterback list for total points here in week 4. Now let's go ahead and look at the skill players here, the non-QBs, starting at number 10. We have the freshman, Lily Rumrell of Milligan versus Ferrum, 7 receptions, 110 yards, 2 touchdowns for 30 points. And then against LaGrange, 6 receptions for 68 yards and 2 touchdowns for 24.8 for a grand total of 54.8 points. Now at 9, we actually have her teammate Ashton Weirley of Milligan, who played in 3 games, or recorded stats for fantasy points through 3 games here, versus Ferrum, 4 receptions, 65 yards, and a touchdown, as well as 13 yards for 17.8 points. And then versus Emmanuel, 39 rushing yards and a touchdown, 4 receptions, 49 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown for 24.8 points, as she kind of did it all in that game. And then against LaGrange, 6 receptions, 65 yards, and 10 rushing yards. Not too much going on there, but a respectable 13.5 for a grand total of 56.1 points. At number 8 here is Caitlin Sigmundy of Weber. Played 3 games here and played some decent teams. Played Thomas and had 9 receptions for 63 yards and a touchdown, good for 21.3 points. Versus Florida Memorial, 4 for 95 and a touchdown for 19.5 points. And then against Campbellsville, 5 receptions, 79 yards, and a touchdown for 18.9 points. Now at 7, we have a first-timer here. That's Kyla Massenberg of Eastern. Only played in 2 games, but was very productive here. Versus Chestnut Hill, had 2 receptions for 50 yards and 2 touchdowns, as well as 26 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown for 27.6 points. And then versus, I don't know why, but there is no name here, versus Centenary, that's who it was, had 65 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns, as well as 2 receptions for 87 yards and a touchdown, good for 35.2 points, and a grand total of 62.8. Now moving on to number 6 here, we have Jessica Finley of Warner playing in 3 games versus Campbellsville, 6 receptions, 113 yards, and a touchdown, good for 23.3 points. Versus Florida Memorial, 6 receptions for 63 yards and a touchdown, good for 18.3 points. And then versus Siena Heights, had 5 receptions, 80 yards, and 4 touchdowns, good for 37 points, for a grand total of 63.5 points. At 5 here, we have a regular in Alyssa Linkus of Ottawa. Only played in 2 games, but against Bethel, had 7 receptions, 163 yards, and 3 touchdowns, good for 41.3 points. And then against Southwestern, had the hat trick again, but had 6 receptions for 29 yards, good for 26.9 points, for a grand total of 68.2 points. Now at 4, we have a first-timer here in Claire Strong of Aurora versus Rockford, 5 receptions, 90 yards, and a touchdown, good for 20 points. And then versus North Park, 6 receptions, 188 receiving yards, and 4 receiving touchdowns. What a stat line for 48.8 points and a grand total of 68.8 points. Now at 3 is Krista Quinn, who had a big week this week with 3 games here. Versus Ferrum, 8 receptions, 44 yards, and a touchdown, good for 18.4 points. Versus Emmanuel, 6 receptions, 74 yards, and a touchdown, good for 19.4 points. And then against LaGrange, 8 receptions, 117 yards, and 2 touchdowns, good for 31.7 points, for a grand total of 69.5 points. Now going to our top 2 here, both from Warner, we have Anna Vincenzini versus Campbellsville, 2 receptions, 47 yards, 2 touchdowns, for 18.7 points. Versus Florida Memorial, had 5 receptions, 80 yards, 3 touchdowns for 31 points. And then versus Siena Heights, 9 receptions, 111 yards, and 3 touchdowns for 38.1 points here, for a grand total of 87.8 points here. And then, like I said, in first place, the Colorado native. Avalon Lux Offerman of Warner, the freshman phenom, versus Campbellsville. 7 receptions, 100 yards, and 3 touchdowns for 35 points. Versus Florida Memorial, 8 receptions, 107 yards, 2 touchdowns for 30.7 points. And then versus Siena Heights, 12 receptions, 106 yards, and 2 touchdowns for 34.6 points, averaging well over 30 points a game here. At least this week. She might have all together, but for sure this week. And that is good enough for the number 1 spot, as she has 100.3 points here through week 4. Super productive. All the really Warner receivers super productive here, but she will go ahead and top the points list in week 4. Alright, now let's go ahead and look at the individual game fantasy point leaders. These are the players who had the most points scored in a single game through week 4 here, or at week 4. Really, I think it's during week 4 is the correct grammar there. But let's go ahead and start at number 10. And by the way, included quarterbacks and receivers, but I think there's only 1 receiver on this list. Might change that moving forward, but I don't think I'm going to do it this week. At 10, though, is Kira Green of Eastern versus Centenary. Had 292 yards, 6 touchdowns through 1 pick, but still had 45.68 points. At number 9, we have Claire Strong of Aurora versus North Park. She had 6 receptions, 188 yards, 4 receiving touchdowns for 48.8 points. At 8, we have Cheyenne Brooks of Life versus Graceland. Have 342 yards, 4 touchdowns, 34 rushing yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns for 53.08 points. Just ahead of her is Shahiro Owada of Kansas Wesleyan at number 7. And that's her performance versus Midland. Had 325 yards, 5 touchdowns, did throw a pick though, but added on another 55 rushing yards and a touchdown for 53.7 points. At number 6 here, just ahead by 0.16, is Kaylin Morgan of Aurora. Specifically her game versus North Park, 324 yards, 5 touchdowns, 1 pick, 69 rushing yards, and a rushing touchdown for 53.86 points. Just ahead by a little bit more at number 5 is Sora Rigdon of Barton College in her performance versus Mount Olive. 317 yards, 7 touchdowns, 1 pick, 14 rushing yards for 54.0 points. At number 4 is Ava Valente of Newman versus Merriwood. Had 325 yards, 7 passing touchdowns, 75 rushing yards for 62.5 points. And then at number 3, I think maybe the first time ever, number 3 has been the same person. But we have Catherine Hutchinson starting at 3. Her performance versus Florida Memorial, where she had 354 yards and 9 touchdowns, good for 68.16 points. At 2 is her performance against Siena Heights, where she had 370 yards and 10 touchdowns for 74.8 points. And then at number 1, in her performance against Campbellsville, 389 yards and 10 touchdowns, good enough for 75.56 points. And like I said, no picks so far this deep into the season, which is very impressive. But she will go ahead and be at the very top, really the top 3 of this leaderboard in points scored in a game here in week 4. Alrighty, now we have your week 4 PMC Fantasy League update. Myself, Cody, and Gino have all picked players, and then the team with the most points, or the team that produces the most points, wins. This is for bragging rights and just to have some fun. So let's go ahead and look right into this here. This was a very eventful week, as we had to maneuver. Some teams not playing, some teams originally not posting stats, which was definitely tough here. But you know, that's part of the process. And so we're going to go ahead and start with the person who scored the most the least amount of points this week. And unfortunately, for the first time ever, that is me. Now, we're going to talk about pickups and stuff that we made on the waiver wire after this update. But this week, it was just rough. Started Terry Lorente, Shiro Owada, who only played 1 game each, but did their thing. Lorente, 30.5 points. Owada, 53.7 points. It was a big Krista Quinn week, who had 69.5 points. Marley Spielberg only played 2 games this week, so 32.6 points. Riley Bolser, though, had a decent week, 49.8 points there. And then Tramisha Harris, 35.7 points. But in the flex was Deshae Branham, who only scored 12.86 points here. Not really scoring the most here, as Destiny Lockett only played one game and did not score more than her, or at least we only had stats for one game from Destiny Lockett, and she didn't score more from her. So definitely looking for maybe a little bit more firepower in the receiving ranks, but we'll talk about that in the waiver wire section of this. Now, in second, and so this is a little bit of a spoiler, but in second is Cody's team, who did put up a valiant effort here. Ava Wallace, 78.92 points. Catherine Hutchinson had 218.52 points all on her own, as she's on a tear. Omariah Gordon, 36.2 points. Ashley Clem, a little bit of a down week, 22.7 points. Alyssa Linkus, though, with a big week, 68.2 points. Addie Schillick with 27.8 points, and Aaliyah Wood with 26.1 points, for a grand total of 478.44, but did fall short for the first time to Gino, who finally wins a matchup and had a massive week here. And I will say this: Olivia Cadis of Ottawa, their backup quarterback, who Gino still has rostered, well, at least as of last week had rostered, scored 46.34 points. Which, really helped him out, because if she didn't score, then he would have only had really one quarterback scoring points. I guess the other one was Luz Ariana Herrera, but she kind of had an up and down week here. The other quarterback that he played or started was Bridget Kaiser, who had a great week, 104.14 points. And then his Warner receivers really showed out this week and carried the team. Jessica Finley, 63.5 points. Avalon Lux-Offerman, 100.3 points. And then Anna Vincenzini, 87.8 points. In addition, Caitlin Sigmundy had a great week per usual, 59.7 points, and then Ashton Weirley added on another 56.1, being really productive this week as well, for a grand total, and I think this is the most points scored ever. Yes, it is 517.86 points, and that is also with the backup quarterback in Olivia Cadis. I think without her, he probably still would have won, which is kind of crazy, or at least would have been really close to winning still, though. So, there you go. Congrats to Gino getting his first win this week here. A lot of that because of the Warner girls, who had a great week this last week here. Now, looking at the waiver wire, let's go ahead and start with me here, because I am last. I will say this: once a couple other players come back, like Amaya Pablo, who's been on a tear, Addie Cadwell playing for Wingate, right? Once they come back, I think the squad will be fine. But I wanted to add some depth here. I am going to drop one player. I had Sophia Guitron of Kaiser on my roster, but she just hasn't played, which is kind of surprising here. I will maybe pick her back up once she plays and production picks up, but for now, I gotta pick players who are playing, and so I am going to pick up Kyla Massenberg, the wide receiver out of Eastern. Had a big week. If you check out the Fantasy Points segment, mentioned her a couple of times here. And she's been a big part of that offense since last year, whether it's catching the ball, running the ball. So hopefully looking to get a little bit more as she competes in the Atlantic East. And then, we did a couple other rounds. Like Cody and Gino also picked up players. But I also picked up two players from Barton College. Sawyer Rigdon, their quarterback, who's been on a tear, as well as Sarah Merritt, who has also been on a tear lately, and I'm excited to see how they do this week. So those are two players I'm picking up here, as I'm trying to keep this team well rounded, make sure that it's updated and have players playing each week with as many matchups as I can compared to at least my opponents. So that's the game plan. Now I will say this: I saw somebody comment on one of our posts that we should pick up Gianna Brown. She was actually on my list of players that I was going to keep an eye on, but this last week had a little bit of a down week here, but definitely somebody that's on the radar. I wanted to shout her out because I almost picked her up. Her and Gwen Carter, those Emmanuel receivers, looked pretty good to me. But for now, went with Barton College and Sarah Marin, as well as Eastern and Kyla Massenberg. And we're going to see how that goes, as I do think this next week will be a pretty decent week for me here in week 5. Now, looking at Cody here, Cody not really adding too many players, but he does add Olivia Dominguez-Millsap out of Midland for this week here, noting that there were some favorable matchups there, and that's Cody being quoted right there, but we'll see how that goes. So there you go. And then Gino will go ahead and pick up a couple players. While Olivia Cadis did a decent job for him, he's actually just going to go ahead and pick Ottawa's actual starting quarterback in Anna Anderson. So he's dropping Cadis for Anderson. And then on top of that, he is also going to add Carly Yoakley, one of the check down options, really just one of the players who's been getting a lot of attention from Amaya Pablo for that Lindsey Wilson team. And he picked her up before last week started, really, or I think it was Saturday when it started, and he is anticipating her having a big week this week. And on top of that, he also picked up Ashton Weirley of Milligan. You might have noticed that, but he picked her up before her game, so I'm going to go ahead and count that. So there you go. Those are the new look teams. All of us have now won a matchup so far. I think Cody has won twice, if I'm not mistaken. 431. Yep. Has won twice here. Gino and I have both won once. So week 5 is going to be an interesting one for sure. Alright, now let's go ahead and get into the rankings here. And just as a reminder, it is the rankings after week 4, so games from March 2nd to March 8th. By the time this drops, there are, I guess it's a slight spoiler, but this, I guess, rankings would technically be a little outdated as some teams have beat others, but these are our rankings after week 4. Now, before we do that, these are the rankings after week 3 from last week. Here at 25 is Lisa McRae, 24 Southwestern, 23 Barton College, 22 Mount St. Mary's, 21 Nevada State, 20 Saddleback, 19 Midland, 18 Irvine Valley, 17 Wingate. Tied at 15 was Lindsey Wilson and Campbellsville, 14 Life, 13 St. Thomas, 12 Thomas, 11 Siena Heights, 10 Ferrum, 9 Daytona State, 8 Weber, 7 Kaiser, 6 Milligan, 5 Kansas Wesleyan, 4 Ottawa, 3 Baker, and tied at number 1 was Warner and Florida Gateway. Now, just as a reminder, myself and the other voters, rankers here, we all get the chance to rank teams 1 through 25, and some of us have different opinions. We have teams in different spots. Regardless, though, here's how the points work. If a team is ranked at number 1 by any of us, they receive 25 points, 224, 323, and so on, and that is basically how I am able to average all of these. And so if a team has the same points, which, happens, that's just how the math goes, then that is how they are tied. So just a reminder on how that works. And by the way, the teams that were just out last week: William Woods, Marymount Hope, Graceland Point, St. Francis, Arizona Christian, Cumberland, Alabama State, King, Emmanuel, and Cypress. This week, we definitely have less teams here that are getting points. Let me go ahead and list the teams that just barely did not make our top 25 here. And I will also read out the notes that some of our rankers have left for the teams that they ranked. Starting with Huntington, they are just out here. They would be technically at 26. Cody and Gino both had comments on Huntington as they had them ranked. Cody said this team has been steadily competitive this season, and I think has also shown the guts to pull out some close ones from this past weekend. Gino said outside that close loss to Cablesville, Huntington has been looking like one of the top D3 teams in the nation, and we'll have to agree with that. Now at 7 is Gallaudet here, coming off of a big win over Lancaster Bible. Our friend at Women's College Flag Football, make sure you check him out at womenscollegeflagfootball.com and Women's College Flag Football anywhere on social media. But he said this about Gallaudet: another preseason top 25 comeback. Competing in the United East, Gallaudet stormed out the gates with a 54-0 blowout victory over Lancaster Bible and looks poised for a deep run. This program has not lost a game since inception. And yes, they have not. That is true. And this will be actually technically the first official year for the United East Conference. Last year it was more of a club thing. I think this year it's a little bit more official. But Gallaudet getting a massive win to go ahead and start this season. Or I guess our other team that is just outside here is Ventura. Cody had this to say about them. Ventura College, a JUCO out of Cali, he said, going to bump Ventura into the top 25, his personal top 25, as a competitive Cali squad who defeated Irvine Valley in a pretty dominant fashion. Women's college flag football said the Pirates recently secured massive back-to-back victories over East Los Angeles 45-6 and 7-1 Irvine Valley 32-12 in impressive manner. Noting basketball team players have returned, so there you go. And that obviously matters as well as Ventura looks to climb and potentially make our top 25. Now, we have Lise McRae here, who did not play but is getting votes here. I think they will rise, and this is me personally, because I voted for Lise McRae to be in my top 25, or I ranked them in here. But I think once they continue to win, there are definitely going to be opportunities for them to rise. So if I were them, I would definitely not be super concerned currently about being outside the top 25. Now, we have Pratt Community College getting some votes here. Women's college flag football said this. Sitting at 2-1, Pratt boasts a win over highly rated Cotty and recently secured an impressive 42-20 win over Hendricks, proving they can put up points in bunches. Looked respectable in a loss to Kansas Wesleyan. And I will have to say, I don't think I put down Pratt in the JUCO recap of beating Hendricks, even though I did see it. I thought maybe it was from the previous week here. But that is a big win. I did watch their game against Cotty. They look good. I do think I just need to see a little bit more for me to rank them, though. Now, we have Point here, who is getting some ranks here. Gino had this to say. They suffered the loss to Huntington, but Point is off to a nice start this year. They've beat the teams they needed to beat, and now they just need an upset to get this program really headed in the right direction. So there you go. Our friend at Women's College Flag Football said this. Under head coach Shaka Long, Point boasts a fast, physical roster. While they've taken a few lumps against top-tier Florida programs, their offense is incredibly dangerous. And I would actually have to agree, Kariah Williams at quarterback is arguably the best quarterback Point has ever had in program history, and she is doing her thing there. Now, Graceland is also getting votes here. Women's College Flag Football have this to say. The Yellow Jackets sneak into the top 25 at 2-1, proving they have the talent and execution to compete on the national stage. They boast an explosive offense that dropped 57 on Cumberland and edged out Reinhardt 25-19. I also have news, I guess, to report as well. I know their coach, Aaron Richardson, he did accept another job to a D2 after this program, but will coach out the rest of this season. That does change some things, though. The loss is tough, but personally, I expect Graceland to string together a couple more wins. They have a new quarterback. She's looked pretty good so far here, and I will be watching that Reinhardt game in full later. But you know, I like where Graceland is at least this year. Don't be surprised if they move into the top 25 here soon. Emmanuel is another team getting votes here. Women's College Flag Football had this to say. The Lions feature a dynamic, balanced attack. Quarterback Lillian Stevenson is commanding the offense with incredible poise, regularly finding standout freshman receiver Gianna Brown. I also want to shout out Gwen Carter, who has had a pretty decent couple weeks as well. And then last but not least, we have Immaculata getting points here. Gino had this to say, giving the reigning Atlantic East champs a taste of their own medicine to start the year is enough for me to give Immaculata a top 25 ranking this week, as they did upset Marymount and are currently, I believe, 2-0. Alright, now let's go ahead and get to our actual top 25 here. Starting at 25, we have Midland, who does drop 6 spots here. Kind of a lot here. Let's go ahead and look at what the fellas had to say. Actually, Cody was the only one who had something to say about Midland. He says, they beat Cotty as they should have, but just not super impressed from the Kansas Wesleyan game. And, you know, I will have to agree with that. I don't think Gino or Women's College Flag Football ranked Midland here. And it's just because, I mean, I don't think any of us expected expected them to be Kansas Wesleyan, but in the back of our head, there's always that opportunity, right, for that to happen, and we just kind of thought it would be a closer game, and it just wasn't. Midland is, I don't want to say it is a rebuilding year, but it just kind of feels that way. They have a lot of young talent, right? They're still putting it together. There's some good performances still, but is it really going to be better than some of the other teams that are just a little bit more stacked and has a lot more experience? The answer right now is I don't know. You prove us wrong by winning games against teams that are better, and they're going to get some opportunities here soon, but right now they just seem like a very young team. We'll see if that changes as, eventually they're not going to be a young team and how much better they could get. Now, tied at 23, we have Campbellsville and Irvine Valley. Both teams falling here by a decent amount. 5 spots for Irvine Valley, 8 spots for Campbellsville. Let's go ahead and talk about Irvine Valley first here. Women's College Flag Football said this: under the guidance of head coach Sammy Logan, the Lasers are a dominant 3C2A force. That's the JUCO system in Cali. And then he said, at 7-1, Irvine Valley has been obliterating opponents. First loss of the season came to a solid Ventura team. This is what Gino had to say. First loss of the year happened, but I expect this explosive offense to come back and justify a top 25 ranking. And yeah, I gotta agree. A loss to Ventura is tough. Not only that, it just wasn't a close game. At least it didn't seem that way. And currently, I don't have Irvine Valley ranked here. At least I don't believe so. I don't have Ventura ranked either. But if I had Irvine Valley ranked, I had to have put Ventura ahead of them. That's just what it is, right? At the very least, Saddleback ahead of them. But right now, that loss against Ventura, that's just a tough pill to swallow there. And then we have Campbellsville, who also drops a couple of spots here. Cody had this to say: this team struggled this week and are close to sliding outside of the top 25 if they cannot turn the tide. They know how to go stride for stride at times, but struggle with consistency throughout a whole game. And I cannot agree more. This Campbellsville team, we were really feeling them in the preseason, and it's still not bad. They're 3-5, right? They played a tough St. Thomas team, a really tough Warner and Kaiser team, and Weber team. Those things are to be expected here. But eventually, you got to start beating teams that are ranked ahead of you for you to justify being here, because they beat a Mars Hill team, Huntington, and LaGrange. Huntington, that even was a close game here. But they got to start winning some games. And it's just unfortunate because that Weber game really looked like a winnable game for them, and they lost by 8 points. And so, this is a team that was very young last year, still relatively young, but you have a lot of experience. They got to start putting it together more to win some of these more quality games like a Weber. This upcoming week, they get Cumberland. They also get Lindsey Wilson, who is still ranked in our top 25, which is a slight spoiler alert. And so that'll be an opportunity to potentially move back up. Now, at 22 is Eastern, who makes an appearance here for the first time ever in our top 25, up from unranked. I know they were getting votes as soon as a couple weeks ago, I want to say, for sure in the preseason. But, they have some dominant wins, and, all it takes is winning to move up. Usually. Now, Women's College Flag Football said this: ranked in my preseason top 25, Eastern is known for explosive offense, kicking the season off with back-to-back blowouts over Chestnut Hill 52-0 and Centenary 62-6. Gino had this to say: what a start. Eastern is looking amazing so far, and they enter my top 20 after the first week of action. And I gotta agree, I got to watch a number, or really both of those Eastern games. I skipped around here, and that defense is electric. Shout out Kira Green and Kyla Massenberg and Damien Moyer, who are doing their thing over there, the veterans. But also shout out Colorado native Molly Shellpepper, leading the team in interceptions, which is interesting for sure. I know she played a little bit of defense here in Colorado in high school, but was mostly known as a receiver, and so seeing her ball out obviously love seeing that. And this Eastern team as a whole, it looks like the team has gotten better compared to last season, just looking at the players who played. So love to see that as they look to contend here in the Atlantic East. Moving on, and by the way, Eastern moving up from unranked, but moving on, we have St. Francis, who does move up a couple spots, previously outside our top 25, getting votes, now sitting here at number 1. This is what Cody had to say. This team has shown has been competitive against some darn good teams and shown growth. I'd say that makes me think they could hang with almost anyone, and I would have to agree there. And you know, they played, this doesn't include week 4, but I will say at the time I'm recording this, they just got a pretty big win here that I feel like definitely, you know, justifies this ranking. And so look out for St. Francis as they continue to play games and climb. Now at 20 is Siena Heights, who does move down 9 spots here. This is what Gino had to say. I'm trying to cut them some slack for playing close games against good teams like St. Thomas, but I can't really justify a top 20 ranking for Siena Heights right now. I think for Gino, he has them ranked at 21. Cody had this to say: the team hung tough with some good programs over the course of the week, but eventually they need to pull out these close games to be up for higher consideration. And yeah, I gotta agree. They are definitely improved on last year, but this last week was tough. You know, a loss 14-12 to Thomas. Actually, starting with Daytona State, lost 33-0, and then lost to Thomas 14-12. Beat Florida Memorial in South Florida by a decent amount, but then lost to Warner by a lot, and then lost to St. Thomas only 14-6 here. I mean, at that point, those are winnable games. If they beat Thomas and St. Thomas, they would easily be in our top 20, maybe even top 15 for sure. But I mean, you just got to win those games, and then with other teams winning games and being undefeated and being dominant, it's just hard to justify them keeping their spot. They're still a top 25 team, but tough losses for sure. Now, moving up here at 19, even though they didn't play, is Hope International, who was previously unranked. But they did get some votes here. They move up here because a lot of teams have lost, and you know, that showing against St. Thomas still looks pretty good to me, and they will pick up gameplay again later this week. But this is what everyone else had to say. Women's college flag football said the Royals are battle-tested out west. Freshman quarterback Ana Morales and dynamic running back Janiyah Haley recently led the team. Only losses are to Weber and Kaiser, which are not bad. Gino said this: they've done nothing but play great football since they beat St. Thomas, who is now in my personal top 10, and then Cody did not say anything. Looking forward to see them back in play here soon, and watching them play hopefully a little bit more. Now, and by the way, this is the first time Hope International was in our top 25 ever. So there you go. Now, at 18 is Saddleback, who does rise 2 spots here. Women's college flag football said this: sporting a younger roster and racking up wins, the Bobcats are the queens of California 3C2A for now. Gino said this: still unblemished on the season and are now at the top of Cali JUCOs for the time being. Cody said this team remains undefeated and has shown consistent and clean football, and I gotta agree, they look pretty good here. I have them ranked in my top 25 for the first time this week, and so they're right here at 18. Now at 17 is Barton College, who moves up 6 spots here. As their rise is kind of meteoric right now. Women's college flag football said Sora Rigdon is already looking like a seasoned vet, recently throwing for 317 yards and 7 touchdowns in their single game this last week. Gino said this offense is crazy. They could easily be a top team in the country, and this game on Saturday against Ferrum is going to be a must-see matchup to see who's the current top team in Conference Carolinas. Cody said this: going to place Barton here. It's early, and I'm not overly impressed by what I have seen from the D2 level quite yet, and will move them up slow and steady. So Cody pumping the brakes on the Barton College hype here. For now, I mean, they have just played D2 level talent, and I think Cody, I'm just going to say, Cody does have kind of a point here. The NCAA levels haven't really been super impressive. When we see them play against top talent on the NAI level or even the JUCO level, they have definitely struggled in most instances. Sometimes they're, competitive, right? Shout out Wingate versus Ottawa. But most instances they struggle. So it does beg the question, how good are these teams actually? And we're going to see. But, you only play who's in front of you. For now, Barton College is undefeated and they're winning big. Now, at 16 is Thomas, who moves down 4 spots here. Cody said this, just some really tough losses this week for the Nighthawks, but this defense can keep them in any game, but they really need to lock in on offense to be taken more seriously as a national contender. Gino had this to say, the defense makes them competitive in any game, but it makes things a lot harder when you barely score any points. Women's college flag football said this, boasting defensive talent like senior Diva Jones, Thomas University has shown they can lock down opponents, highlighted by a dominant 40-0 shutout win over Elise McRae a couple weeks ago. I will say this for Thomas, getting Destiny Lockett back this week, definitely big. But they got to figure it out offensively. Cam King, she's gotten in there. There's been some flashes for sure, but she's a young quarterback. And so I don't know if that's going to happen this year. There's going to definitely be some growing pains. But, we'll see what happens. They have some talent over there. I don't think enough talent to overcome some struggles at quarterback, but they definitely have some talent. And so I think for now they're in our top 25. But they do got to start winning some games here soon. Now at 15 is Lindsey Wilson, and they stay right here. One of the few teams in our rankings this week who stay the same here, and they did not play this week, but women's college flag football did say this. Despite a tough loss to Ferrum, Lindsey Wilson is a scoring juggernaut to watch closely. They utilize a 2-quarterback system with Jaylee Santiago and Amaya Pablo, who combined for 17 passing touchdowns in a single week. I will say, as of recently, it does look like Amaya Pablo is a starter, and they've stuck with her, but they can run that 2 QB system, who has been giving a lot of NCAA teams some issues. That's for sure there. But regardless, this is a good team. It's going to be interesting to see if they could bounce back from that Ferrum loss, though. At 14, though, is Nevada State, who continues to rise, moving up 7 spots. Women's college flag football says this, launching their inaugural athletic program this spring, Nevada State is an unbelievable 8-0. They've been an offensive buzzsaw since the first snap in the Silver State. Gino said this, nothing but pure dominance so far, just wish we could see their stats, and I agree with that. Cody said this team is a literal buzzsaw and stays absolutely rolling, and yeah, I mean, it is made up of some of the top talent in Nevada here. Their quarterback has been excellent. I mean, everyone has been excellent over there as they have been tearing up the West Coast here. I think Gino said this to me, we were talking, so it wasn't completely on record, but we were talking, and he says he believes that they are probably the top West Coast team in the country, and it's not super close currently. Now, maybe that changes, but right now, just not super close. So, there you go. Nevada State continuing to rise as they enter the top 15. Now, at 13 is Wingate, who did not play this last week, but do move up a couple of spots. A couple other teams lost here. So, Wingate, although not playing, moves up. Excited to see Wingate back in action. At 12 is Ferrum, who does drop a couple spots here. Women's college flag football said this, Panthers are off to a blistering 3-1 start behind excellent QB play. The Ferrum offense is clicking on all cylinders. A recent 12-point gritty loss to Milligan shows the Panthers are a tough out, and I agree. Gino said this, Ferrum fought their tails off against Milligan and put together some great drives, but they just couldn't get points on the board. They'll have another shot at Milligan on March 11th here in Week 5. Cody said this, honestly, a pretty respectable loss to Milligan, but due to other teams not playing, they swapped instead of slid down, at least in Cody's personal ranking. So, Ferrum, a decent showing against Milligan, a team who's a contender, a team who has a lot of talent, who is deep, who has veteran leadership. I think you love to see that if you're Ferrum, if they could continue to play them closer, maybe in this next matchup, that'll even bode better for them, as they could definitely move up if they win the right games. Now, Speaking of winning the right games, we have Life, who moves up 3 spots here to 11. Cody said this, nice showing from Life this week, taking care of business and showing they belong in the top 15. Gino said this, Life went from almost dropping out of my top 25 to being on the brink of a top 10 spot real quick. That win over Florida Gateway is going to give this team all the confidence they need to keep this winning train rolling. And I will mention that here, or talk about that here after this. But Women's College Flag Football said this, the Running Eagles are a gritty Sun Conference contender. Even in the recent loss to Kaiser, quarterback Cheyenne Brooks showed incredible poise, throwing for 162 yards and 2 touchdowns to receiver Altiera Gooch, who has been picking it up lately. Now, Gino did mention that win here. Technically, still a scrimmage. They couldn't post the score, but Florida Gateway posted the score here, and they lost to Life, plain and simple. Not too much is known about the game as of today, March 10th here, unless I'm just missing on some messages right now, but it does seem like that was pretty much a regular game outside of the title here, so technically still a scrimmage, but I mean, it sounded like starters played on both sides. Definitely something to note here, keep in the back of our heads, but I don't know if that weighs a whole bunch for me personally as far as rankings go. Now at 10 is St. Thomas, who climbs back up here, up 3 spots back into the top 10. Women's College Flag Football said this, the Bobcats are battle-tested in the Sun Conference with a 5-1 record. Their only loss came against a tough Hope International team in 6 overtimes, but they have secured key quality wins, showing that they are in the mix in the Sun Conference. Gino said this, St. Thomas has been playing some great football since their loss here to... not their loss to Thomas, since their loss to Hope, they slide back into the top 10 this week. Cody said a great weekend of production for St. Thomas and some resilience was shown and helped them launch back into the top 10. And you know, all it took was some winning, right? They look like to be back on track, maybe still some questions at quarterback as they still are splitting time. But we'll see how that holds up against some tougher opponents and the rest of their schedule moving forward. Now at 9 here is Daytona State, who is one of the few teams who stays right here in the top 10. Women's College Flag Football said after Florida Gateway's loss to Life, the Falcons could be the team to beat in the FCSAA ranks. They have shown immense resilience this season, recently holding off a late fourth quarter surge to defeat Lisa McRae 21-14, and that was a couple weeks ago. Gino said this huge game this week against the potentially wounded Florida Gateway Timberwolves. This is an amazing opportunity for Daytona State to send shockwaves around the country with the win over a top 5 team this week. Cody said this, they stay rolling with a massive game this week. They got Florida Gateway. And yeah, I think that is probably the game to watch this week. Unfortunately, I don't think it's being streamed here, and we're not going to pay for it because we have like a million other programs around the country to cover and whatnot. But it should be a good one. Looking forward to seeing what the score is and hopefully a box score. Now at 8 is Kansas Wesleyan, who actually slides a little bit here. Women's College Flag Football said this, the Coyotes are lighting up the scoreboard in the KCAC. Quarterback Awada is playing at an MVP level, having captured NAI Offensive Player of the Week honors after famously throwing for 6 touchdowns and running for a 7th in a single half. Gino said this, I expect them to beat Pratt by a bit more, but this team is looking great outside of that. The freshman class they've got is one of the best in the country. Cody said this, not going to punish them for beating who's in front of them at the moment, which is interesting there. Kansas Wesleyan, I mean, for me, I think they dropped just a little bit because other teams have won, you know, against a better comp so far. Now, Kansas Wesleyan will get their shot here soon to move up, but right now, I do respect the wins that some of these other programs have got. Now, at 7 is Weber, who moves up a spot here. This is what Cody had to say. The breathing room is shrinking against some other solid competition, but the Warriors persevered for some wins. Gino said an amazing start to the year has Weber in top 5 consideration, and it's great to see. This is definitely a dark horse team. Women's College Flag Football said Weber has not been challenged, not yet. Like I said, this was written on Sunday. And then said senior Caitlin Sigmundy Halling is a top receiver option. So there you go. Weber at 7 for now. Now at 6 is Florida Gateway, who does drop almost 5 spots, previously tied for first. let's go ahead and talk about it. Women's college flag football said this. The Timberwolves shocked with the overall spot in the women's college flag football top 25 poll earlier this season, putting the nation on notice with massive wins over Ottawa and Point. A loss to life U drops the Wolves. Gino said this: a loss to life, scrimmage or no scrimmage, is quite concerning. They will need to dominate against Daytona State this week for me to give them top 5 consideration again. Cody said this: scrimmages don't count, so I'm not going to count them here. They don't count. I will say that. It does not count officially, but with that being said, Florida Gateway should still beat life. And, I mean, even if they played non-starters, I mean, the expectation with them being the number 1 team is that they still beat life, as Warner basically did that, and they beat them pretty easily. And right now, even though it doesn't count officially, it is still something to note. And so, I don't know if I would have dropped them down this far. I didn't. Personally, I had them at 3 in my personal rankings, but it is something to keep in mind here. We'll see, but you heard the reasons from womenscollegeflagfootball.com and Gino. Now at 5 is Kaiser, who moves up 2 spots here. Cody said this: they bounce back with some quality wins and some of the best QB play in the country. I like what I saw from the defense, making momentum swinging plays. Gino said this: that blown lead leading to a loss against Ottawa is keeping me from having this team ranked too high, which was last week, but I guess that is not going away there. Women's college flag football said already climbing up. The Seahawks boast one of the most explosive offenses in the NAI. Ava Wallace has been virtually unstoppable in 2 recent wins over Life and Wingate. Wallace threw for 503 yards and 11 touchdowns in those wins. And yeah, look, Kaiser moves up a spot. They're going to move up slowly and surely for me as they continue to win. They will get some opportunities to take shots at the top here. Actually, I guess they get a shot at the very end of the season, so there will be that. But I don't think there's a doubt that this team is a contender and that they deserve to potentially be a number 1 team. The loss to Ottawa is not going away, though. While the defense continues to get better, and this is a defense that, is maybe not the most experienced, it's going to take some time. For sure, it's going to take some time. We're going to see if they could really get into form as the season ramps up, though. Now, at 5 is Ottawa. Ottawa stays right here at 4 is Ottawa. Ottawa stays right here at 4. This is what Women's College Flag Football said. The Braves entered 2026 as the unanimous number 1 team in the first ever NAI preseason polls. Despite a loss to Kaiser, slips behind them on schedule. Wins came with Southwestern, who struggled with Heston and Bethel. So there you go. But Ottawa continues to roll. Gino said this: Ottawa has a huge chance to reclaim their number 2 spot if they beat Baker on March 11th, which is tomorrow. When I'm recording this, when this comes out, that game would have already happened. He said it's an away game, and Baker is red hot right now, so that game is an absolute must-watch for sure. Arguably a must-win as well. Cody said this: they really played Bethel after that tough stretch to get back into dominant rhythm, and that's pretty much it. And yeah, so for Ottawa, it looks like they're back on track. I personally think they have to beat Baker. They do, for them to rise. If they lose, you have a Kaiser, you have a Florida Gateway, you have other teams who are knocking on the door here who have been winning so far. And I think a loss there would basically, for me, make it okay to move them below them. And so we're going to have to see. And then as far as conference implications go, this is a very important game. Have to beat Baker. Now at 3 is Milligan, who moves up 3 spots. Cody said this: Milligan been balling out and could have some serious chances to climb this week, depending what happens in front of them, which I agree with. Looking at the Baker game specifically, actually, really, Milligan could potentially benefit from Baker losing or winning. If Baker wins, I think Milligan probably stays right here at 3, which is still a win. But if they lose, I think Milligan easily moves up and stays ahead of both Baker and Ottawa. So we will see what happens there. Gino had this to say: undefeated and rolling so far. It'll be cool to see if they can justify this high of a ranking against teams like Ferrum, Lindsey Wilson, and Wingate. So we'll see what happens there. And then women's college flag football said Buff Nation is rolling. Quarterback Bridget Kaiser has already thrown for over 1,000 yards and 17 touchdowns and just 4 recorded box scores. Now at number 2 right now is Baker, who moves up to the spot. I think this is the highest they have ever been ranked. Women's college flag football said the Wildcats returned a loaded veteran roster featuring 8 all KCAC honorees, including first team standouts Kaylee Phillips and Sanaya Waller, who are the engine driving this flawless 5-0 start. Gino said this Florida Gateway taking a loss this week as Baker ranked higher than ever, having been at number 2 in the nation for my rankings. Cody says this Baker stays rolling with great games up ahead, and I gotta agree there. Now, they're going to be tested here, so this might be a 1-week showing, but if they win, then they stay here, and they might even get a shot at number 1 here. Who knows? But Baker, led by Tara Lorente and company, shout out Coach Willie Perez, they're a very good team, and they are rolling. Now at 1 is Warner, who stays right here, but now they are the undisputed number 1 team in the country. Women's College Flag Football.com says it well. Who else? Recently sweeping the NAIA Player of the Week awards, quarterback Katherine Hutchinson is completing over 70% of her passes, while defender Adriana Bressmeyer anchors a defense that refuses to yield. Gino said this undisputed number 1, just need Coach Mims to post those stats from week 4 for the Fantasy League. That is old. That has been done. So there you go. And then Cody just says stay rolling. And I gotta agree with that. Warner right now, look, you could argue that they have not played maybe the strongest opponents compared to some other teams, but they are dominating every game so far. And they're dominating cross-conference games, which do matter so far. Today, actually, here in a couple hours, they play St. Francis at the time I'm recording this, and then they play Wittenberg on Wednesday. And then later, this is a busy week. They played Point after that. But really, I don't think Warner's going to get truly tested until maybe the end of the season, where they got Weber and Kaiser here. But for now, Warner's going to keep dominating. And their quarterback has not really made a mistake, has not thrown an interception yet. That's as dominant as it gets. Plus, the defense looks really good. So, right now, Warner is your undisputed number 1 team in the country through week 4. So, there you go. That's your top 25. Once again, it's Huntington, Gallaudet, Ventura College, Lise McRae, Pratt, Community College Point, Graceland, and Emmanuel, who are just out. At 25 is Midland. Tied at 23 is Campbellsville and Irvine Valley. 22 is Eastern. 21 is St. Francis. 20 is Siena Heights. 19 for the first time ever is Hope International. 18 Saddleback. 17 Barton College. 16 Thomas. 15 Lindsey Wilson. 14 Nevada State. 13 Wingate. 12 Ferrum. 11 Life. 10 St. Thomas. 9 Daytona State. 8 Kansas Wesleyan. 7 Weber. 6 Florida Gateway. 5 Kaiser. 4 Ottawa. 3 Milligan. 2 Baker. And at number 1, undisputed, unanimous, is now Warner. Alrighty, thank you so much for rocking with us on this episode. Make sure you find us on social media at Playmaker's Corner, and then make sure you also check out our website as well, where we're basically posting a lot of the same content, but you'll be able to see some of the winners, Playmakers of the Week's rankings, and other award winners from last year. And that does matter, because coming up soon here, we're going to hit the midway point, and we're probably going to release, your midway MVPs, Opoys, Depoys, like players that we are considering for finalists and whatnot. So that way you could get to see who's kind of won it and kind of, I guess, what that expectation is winning it and whatnot as well. But a lot of great football ahead here. Excited, especially, I'm going to be a little bit biased here, but I get to cover the Division III level. So I know the Atlantic East and the United East are going crazy right now, as well as the Illinois teams and, per usual, the Cali teams, Cali team as well. So it's going to be great. Looking forward to some great football. Thank you again for rocking with us, and we'll catch you later.